Today, we're going to dive into some of the most powerful and recognizable images in Western culture. I mean, you've seen them in art and movies, you hear about them all the time, but what if I told you that some of the most famous parts of these stories aren't actually in the Bible?
Yeah, I'm serious. Some of the most famous details, the ones that feel absolutely essential to the stories we all know, well, they're not actually in there at all. Let's look at a few images that will probably feel very familiar. You can picture it in your head right now, can't you? Eve, the garden, and that shiny red apple that, changed the world. Or how about the classic nativity scene? It's on pretty much every Christmas card. 3 kings, all gathered around the newborn Jesus.
And, of course, there's the ultimate villain, Satan, sitting on a throne in hell, pitchfork in hand, the undisputed king of the underworld. These images are so powerful, but as we're about to see, they're built a lot more on tradition than they are on the actual text.
So, let's start right there. With these famous narratives, we're going to peel back the layers of art, literature, and centuries of tradition to see what the original source material really has to say.
First up, the Garden of Eden. Everybody knows the forbidden fruit was an apple. I mean, it's so ingrained in our culture that one of the biggest tech companies in the world uses a bitten apple for its logo.
But here's the thing, if you actually go back to the book of Genesis, it never ever names the fruit. It just calls it the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's it. So where in the world did we get this very specific idea of an apple?
Well, the answer is pretty wild. It seems to come from a simple and pretty clever Latin pun. See, the Latin word for evil is malum, and the Latin word for apple is malum. They sound almost exactly the same. So as the story was translated and retold across Europe, this little mix-up seems to have stuck, and it completely changed how we picture that pivotal moment forever.
Okay, let's move on to the nativity scene. We all know there were 3 wise men, right? Or were there?
The Bible mentions magi from the east who brought 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So the logic kind of follows, right? 3 gifts must mean 3 givers. But the text never actually gives a number. For all we know, it could have been 2 magi, or maybe a whole caravan of them. And their famous names, Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar, you won't find those in the Bible either. They don't pop up until a traditional text from the 6th century.
And now for our last story in this section, Satan's job description. Pop culture presents him as the ruler of hell, kind of like the CEO of eternal damnation, commanding legions of demons from his fiery throne. But biblically speaking, this is totally backwards. The scriptures describe hell, or the lake of fire, as a place of punishment for Satan and his angels, not a kingdom where he gets to rule. He's destined to be an inmate, not the warden. The Bible actually says his current domain is here on earth, where he roams like a roaring lion. So where did this super powerful image come from? You guessed it, not from the Bible. It's from literature. Our modern image of Satan as the master of hell is drawn almost entirely from epic poems like Dante's Inferno and Milton's Paradise Lost. These stories were just so vivid that they basically overwrote the original text in the popular imagination. It's not just the stories that get shaped and changed by tradition. Let's move on and look at some famous rules, moral guidelines that tons of people assume come straight from the Bible. Pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. The 7 deadly sins. It feels like one of the most fundamental checklists in Christianity. It's got to be a direct list from the Bible, surely. Surprisingly, no. While the Bible for sure condemns all of these behaviors, this specific, famous list of 7 doesn't appear anywhere in its pages. It was actually compiled by Pope Gregory I way back in the 6th century. And what's really interesting is that the Bible treats things like gossip and slander with equal seriousness, but they never made it onto this official list.
What about alcohol? Many people believe the Bible forbids drinking entirely, but the text makes a really clear distinction. It repeatedly condemns drunkenness, excess and losing control, but not the act of drinking itself. In fact, Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine, and the Apostle Paul even advised his friend Timothy to drink a little wine for his health. Now, this is one of the most common phrases of comfort you'll ever hear. It's meant to be encouraging, right? A promise that no matter how bad things get, you'll have the strength to get through it. And it's widely believed to be a direct quote from the Bible.
But that exact phrase, it's not actually in the Bible. It seems to be a well-intentioned misreading of a verse that's talking about temptation to sin, not general suffering or pain. That verse promises a way out of being tempted, but it doesn't promise that there's a limit on general hardship. In fact, the Bible is full of stories about people like Job or Elijah who were pushed far beyond what they could handle alone.
Okay, finally, let's look at a couple of major traditions that feel ancient, like they're totally central to the faith, but are actually much, much more recent than you might think. The whole idea of the rapture, that moment when believers are suddenly taken up to heaven, leaving the rest of the world behind, it's a huge concept in modern evangelicalism. It spawned blockbuster books, movies, and a very specific view of the end times. But this specific theory is surprisingly modern. For most of Christian history, the belief was simple. Jesus would return once for everyone at the very end. It wasn't until the 1830s that a theologian named John Nelson Darby popularized this idea of a secret, pre-tribulation rapture. It's become a huge idea, but it's a relatively new one. And finally, Christmas itself. December 25th is the day. But the Bible gives no date for Jesus' birth. The one clue we do have is that shepherds were out in the fields with their flocks at night, something they definitely wouldn't have been doing in the freezing cold of a Judean winter. So why that date? It was probably chosen centuries later to align with existing Roman winter festivals, like Saturnalia, to make it easier for new people to adopt the faith.
So, from forbidden apples to the date of Christmas, we've seen how tradition, art, and even simple puns can shape our beliefs in really powerful ways. It leaves us with a final question. Why are these altered versions sometimes even more memorable than the originals? Perhaps it shows how much we all crave clear images, simple rules, and just a really compelling story. It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.